Hey everybody, it's Erik, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Village Global's Venture Stories. I'm here today joined by a very special returning guest, Turner Novak. Turner, welcome back to the program.
Hey, Erik. Thanks for having me back.
Turner, this was by popular demand, largely by a number of teenagers who found you on TikTok and are now, aspiring VCs, and you're blowing up. How does it feel?
You know what? I'm just trying to keep making good content. Make people happy, make people laugh, maybe teach people something, a thing or two. So.
You sounded like an athlete at a post-game interview. Just try to, go our game plan. Coach told us to do this, and we just did it, executed. That's awesome. So last time we were on, it was a couple years ago. Consumer social was in a very different place. It's 2020. We're in the era of COVID. We'll get to Snap, ByteDance, and Facebook individually, but how are you thinking about consumer social from a VC perspective right now, in the sense that if you were to make any investments in the next 6 months in new consumer social companies, what characteristics might they have?
Yeah, I think consumer social is really interesting. There's a lot of things you can do, adding a social component to existing products or just a, quote unquote, boring old social network. But yeah, I think verticalized social networks are really interesting. It gives you a certain kind of go to market that maybe is more effective than if it's very broad. I think you have to be careful because there's certain categories in verticalized social where it's maybe harder to compete against an incumbent. But it's basically like finding a behavior that already exists. That's probably, there's 10 million or 100 million or 1 billion people already doing this activity. And can you make it, 10 times easier or make them able to be 10 times more creative than what the existing platforms let them do? And that's a very broad question and way to phrase it, but that's kind of how I think about it. And then another piece I think is super interesting is taking social components and just bringing them to an industry or a product or category that's never really had social before. I think the beauty of social networks is you basically have the users grow it for you. It's, if you do it right, it's like free CAC, free growth. But then also we're starting to see elements where there's a commerce component, or you basically go full stack, and instead of letting someone else buy ads and then they make 2 or 3 times on the ad, you just remove the ad process and just sell things directly, and you capture all that value. And then there's also benefits where you can you can kind of aggregate all of the consumer demand, and you influence what gets filled in that demand. And I think, we could see it in literally every category. Venmo is an early example of social on top of payments. I think Snack Pass is a really interesting one where it's social on top of food delivery, restaurants, e-commerce. You can kind of think about how that expands over time. So I just think we'll see some interesting stuff. There's a lot of people doing things in sports. There's some cool things out there. You can think about it's not just anymore about, can you throw ads in a feed and that's how you monetize? You can literally make money doing anything, like a subscription, a subscription community where it's 1 million diehard fans that pay $30 a month for some product, and that gets you to $1 billion company, right? That could return your fund depending on how big your fund is. So there's a lot of different interesting angles. I think it's people kind of cracking in something that already exists, but nobody else really knows it exists yet. If that makes sense.
Totally. And speaking of adding a social layer on top of commerce, one of the businesses that you're really inspired by and intrigued by is Pinduoduo in China. I'm totally botching the pronunciation, but we'll call it PDD from now on. What makes it so interesting to you, and what's applicable? What can we learn from it?
Yeah, it is a very interesting story because it was founded 5 years ago, $0, right? And now it's worth, I haven't checked today, but it's worth $160 billion in the public markets 5 years later. That's absolutely insane. I don't think a company's ever grown that fast before. And so it's an interesting story because the founder, his parents worked in a factory, super lowest of the lowest class in China, really didn't have anything growing up, and was just a smart guy. I'm skipping a lot of details, but just worked hard, did the right kind of stuff, and, founded a couple companies. And with PDD specifically, you kind of think about what year was this, like 2015 when it was founded. You kind of think about what does e-commerce look like in China and probably in the US too. It's like Amazon, Alibaba. Alibaba was public, valued at, I don't know, I forget what it was at that time, like 200 billion, doing close to 200 billion in GMV. You're like, how can you compete with Alibaba? You know, they're massive. They have 300 million users or buyers. And just this insight of, Alibaba was basically built for desktop. So the way their DNA is set up, open the browser, type for what you want, you search for what you need. There's millions of categories and options. And as a consumer, like that can be good, but when you're on your phone, it's like you're going to make me search for something and like type it in what I want. Like, no, it's like Facebook, and what made the Facebook and Instagram feed so interesting and great for consumers, but also great from a business perspective is you basically open up the app and it just gives you what you want to see. So PDD did the same thing where you open it up and it just gives you deals essentially. And for PDD in the beginning, it was a lot of the very, very early days was they basically bought a bunch of Facebook ads for a bin of fruit. They like bought a bin of fruits, split it up into a couple different, so they could deliver like 100 packages, 1,000 packages or whatever, bought some ads to like sell them. And they realized like, holy crap, we just sold all these fruit super easily. We cut a bunch of costs. We, made it super cheap for consumers, and they made a bunch of money, like splitting up fruit into these individual purchases. And they kind of realized that people thought it was fun to like buy and get a good deal for fruit. And it's just like this random thing. It's really low intent. You're not like going on this app and saying like, oh, I need batteries, or I need like something in my house fixed. I need this delivered immediately. You bought like some silly fruit that you'll eat in a week and you don't care when you get it. So you kind of you could deliver it without urgency, and shipping costs could be lower because of that. And then it was all, like I said, presented in a feed. So you basically controlled what the consumers saw. So they started with fruit. Long story short, they kind of combined it with a gaming company, added a lot of gaming components to increase retention and engagement. If you look at their data now, that's kind of disclosed, and, like sell side analysts will put out reports, the kind of DAU MAU, basically like the stickiness and engagement of the product throughout the course of a month is about 10 percentage points higher than Alibaba and JD. So those are in the 30s, PDDs in the 40s. 40% of the DAU of the MAUs check it every day, which is pretty insane. And so they essentially like you use machine learning, you optimize the feed, and instead of opening up an e-commerce thing where you search for what you want, it just shows you some deals that you might be interested in, like an umbrella, some shoes, some random fruit. And, and I think their biggest top selling item is tissue paper, right? It's like, what? And like kind of circling back, it's $160 billion business. But what this did was it allowed them to pool together orders. So they could basically say, hey, manufacturer of tissue paper, we can guarantee you 100 million units. I'm making up this number, but we can guarantee you 100 million units this month. And as a factory who, at the time in China, it was 2016, 17, 18, the trade war was going on. They had a lot of capacity that kind of evaporated, or the demand evaporated. So they had unused capacity, and they could basically say, hey, like, we'll help you sell more tissue paper, vacuums, whatever it is. And instead of selling to a foreign overseas brand who then mark it up 10x and sell it to Europeans and Americans, just sell it at the same price, probably higher. You can make twice as much money selling it to Chinese consumers, who a bunch of middlemen get removed from not having to go through distributors, going to a retail store and pick it up, or ordering on Alibaba. They actually get a good deal too. And so you basically let them remove multiple layers of middlemen in the process, make consumers more money, and then take a cut themselves. What they did was they turned it into an auction marketplace where you could basically, they could bid on that demand, the suppliers and the manufacturers. Really similar to like Facebook ads. Like you've got capacity, you're a roofer, you want to buy ads on Google to go fix someone's roof. I mean, Google's $1 trillion company here in the US and globally. They kind of did the same thing with e-commerce, and they just kind of went all in on it right away. And then they also they focused on low cost. So the classic bottoms up disruption, the consumers they targeted in the beginning were in tier 3, 4, and 5 cities in China, which that's the equivalent of, starting a company where you're going after people who live in just throwing these names out there, but like a city like St. Louis or like Kansas City, like no one talks about these cities in the US. You talk about San Francisco, New York, but kind of these like random cities with like 1 million people or 500,000 people. And they just like owned those consumers, and a lot of like lower class rural consumers who, their incomes were like 1/10 of the people living in the cities. And they kind of nailed that consumer, and they slowly started moving up market. And now they're right on par with Alibaba. It's pretty remarkable how they're probably going to pass them in total active number of customers in Q4 of 2020. I think in Q3, Baba was like 750 million and PDD was 730 million, and they're growing twice as fast. So same base, but they're growing twice as fast. It's insane. And so I think there's a couple other sort of elements, like, WeChat had just launched WeChat Pay, where you could pay within the WeChat app. PDD grew a lot, where people would basically share all these deals within WeChat, and it was very viral because you basically is like, hey, Erik, if I buy this by myself, I pay $1 for this tissue, but if I get you and a couple other people to buy, we pay 30 cents each for some tissue paper. And we're all like, wow, this is great. Chinese housewives, these poor rural people, they're like, oh, this is great. Like, look at these deals. They're all sharing it. And then WeChat also launched a mini programs feature where it's basically an app within WeChat. So they kind of took that to the extreme. Instead of just doing it in WeChat, like texting and chat, it was literally an app within WeChat. So you actually had the PDD app, so they could really quick. There was low friction to getting new users. Eventually, you funnel them into the other app, and we don't quite have that here in the US. But I think there's just a lot of different elements that you can kind of borrow, whether it's cutting middlemen, getting a closer touch point with consumer, introducing advertising to different products, introducing social elements, growing on top of other platforms. Like, there's just so many lessons that startups can learn from. And I think it's one of the most fascinating businesses out there right now. So that's why I've been talking about it and researching it a lot the last year.
And it's interesting. One of the ones I'll just pick up on is you mentioned disrupting from below. It's interesting because it's sort of, Tesla and Uber, a lot of people copy that model, which is, you go premium first, and then, that subsidizes the ability to work your way down. Is there a framework for thinking about when you should disrupt from above versus when you should disrupt from below?
I mean, I think part of it depends on where the opening is in the market. So with Tesla and Uber was competing against taxis. I consider those the low end. It's not really a premium experience. And then Tesla, you're competing against the automakers who are probably targeting the low end. Yeah. But then with something like PDD, there was already these JD and then Alibaba were kind of the two. They were really targeted at, higher class citizens living in the big cities. They had incomes and like kind of demographic profiles a little bit more similar to, like higher income in the US and developed markets. So I think it's just about figuring out where's the hole in the market, how do you differentiate, and it's kind of like optimizing, get as low as CAC as possible. Like, how can you basically get people for free because there's no competition? Like, that's what I love as a VC. Like, that's what you're trying to invest in.
Yeah. It's interesting. We just invested in sort of a fitness company that's basically future fit for the low end, because future fit is too intense, expensive, elite for a large percentage of Americans. At least so far, they'll work their way down, I'm sure. But they're really going after sort of people in red states in the middle of the country who aren't as fit and don't have as high of demand and don't have as much to pay.
Yeah, I think that can be really effective too, especially when the incumbent is disincentivized from reacting. Yeah. So if you have, like, let's say they have coaches like Future Fit. I have no idea how Future Fit works, but they have coaches who focus on like certain things and like the whole business model is set up towards the higher end. Like, definitely an opportunity there. I mean, it's like same with Tesla. It's like the incumbents or gas guzzling cars that people finance to the gills, like 84 months financing at 0% interest. People buying new cars were like rolling over their equity or negative equity in old vehicles to get new ones. It's like, that's how the automakers are making money. They're not going, and they're selling also to, they had layers of middlemen. They had the dealerships. Tesla just like cut out the middlemen. Like, all the dealerships are not owned by these automakers. And there's like a layer of dealers who do their own stuff. And typically actually the dealers, they really don't make much money on the cars. They make money from getting you to sign up for financing and get upgrades and packages. So if Tesla can just be like, yeah, we're just going to make money by making a good car, and they went straight direct to consumer. I mean, the CEO tweets on Twitter all day. Like, it's the ultimate D2C play.
Yeah. Let's transition to gaming a little bit. Gaming is so interesting. One, just as a pioneer of different sort of business models and products, right? You have, Discord, sort of this the Slack for gaming, and everyone thought, oh, are now going to do, Slack for X or Discord for X? But then also, many years before, Twitch really, live streaming for gaming, and so people were like, oh, are we going to see Twitch for X? We haven't really at scale. Where are you excited about gaming, and how do you think about it?
Yeah, well, I think the interesting thing with gaming is everyone is a gamer, whether they know about it or not. I mean, even if you don't play any video games or mobile games, like, your email is a game. Like, you try to get through it, right? Like, throughout the day, or whatever you do at work, you probably, the things someone does for their career, like, they probably enjoy it. So it's kind of like taking gaming components and just putting it in other products. I think, like, something in e-commerce where you get rewarded for checking in every day, and you get like deals, and you get a streak. You get, like, that's gaming coming into social. It's like Snapchat streaks. Yeah. There's kids who've sent messages to their friends like 2,000 days in a row now, right? Like, talk about getting people sticky in the product. Yeah, I mean, I think gaming and education, super interesting. Education's like you talk about this a lot. It's like very broken, outdated market. It's like we spend a good chunk of GDP on it, and it's like it's basically set up for the 1800s, not the 2020s. So I think, like, basically, and I think I think of a lot of kids, the way they learn things. Like, I learned so much from playing Civilization, like, growing up, just like learning about history and stuff. Like, and then I also learned like typing, how to read, and like doing math. Like, you play those games, like, that's the best way to do it. So, and I think it's going to happen because you just think of the way most kids grow up now. Like, there's more technology. I think it's inevitable. You have to be careful about it, but I think that you can actually learn. It's easier to learn. Yeah. I think, my daughter learns a ton just from her tablet. She has games where she's like, she does stuff that's educational, and I'm like, how'd you learn that? She's like, I learned it in my tablet. So that's I think awesome. We'll definitely see just gaming creep into everything. I mean, even healthcare would be interesting. Like, and you've kind of seen it with some of these apps now. It's like, eat an apple a day to keep the doctor away. Like, literally, like, checking in with what you're eating to be healthy, and doing workouts and stuff like that. So, I think I don't think I'm the first person to this thesis, but really, like, gaming's eating the world. Like, just like software ate the world, I think gaming's eating the world too.
Totally. Going back to PDD for a second, what are startups that you could imagine that you're seeing, or you could imagine being built that sort of really leveraged a key PDD insight? Maybe it's sort of the shared, buying experience or shared experience. Like, what's an example of a company you'd like to see that you haven't yet seen yet or hasn't blown up yet?
Something that people ask me about probably every day is PDD for the US. I don't know. It's tough because you don't quite have the same components. I think the hardest part is there's no production here. We moved all our production out of the US. Okay. I was trying to think about, what do we actually make in the US? Wheat and like corn. Some furniture is assembled here. Maybe some clothing, but yeah, it just makes it harder. It might have to be something service based. But yeah, it's like, it's not quite as fun because there's the urgency. Like, you do like PDD team purchases for getting your roof fixed, but it's like, you can't have somebody wait a week to get their roof fixed. It has to be an urgent thing. So I don't know. I think the thing I think a lot about is like PDD specifically for other markets, like Latin America invested in a company. Maybe there's something in Africa, Southeast Asia. There's a publicly traded company called C Limited, which has, some similar components, PDD for India. I've kind of heard some people talk about that. So the one interesting investment thesis I've kind of had, and it's been kind of growing on me, but taking something that works in one market and, bringing it to a different market. Like, I think people think, oh, Facebook is global, crushed everyone. Every other business and category and product will be like that. But if there's any kind of operational component, that's pretty hard to localize. And I think a lot of these companies, like, you can build a $10 billion business doing, like, I just heard of today, there's a Kazakhstan fintech company. The population's 18 million. It just IPO'd for $6.5 billion. That's pretty good. So it's a verticalized, almost like a super app for Kazakhstan, and they just have some of your classic super app features. So I think there's probably different categories. Like I don't know necessarily Tinder for a certain region. I don't know if that's something that would like stick, and we've kind of seen it like a lot of these e-commerce companies like Mercado Libre in Latin America. Basically, it's Amazon for Latin America. So I think we'll kind of see like anytime you see sort of an operational improvement or efficiency that goes against how an incumbent operates and it just doesn't make sense for them to copy, I think you'll be able to see that localized. You think about Amazon, the way they operate, it's fulfillment centers, kind of distributed. Could they ever do closed loop delivery where it like reduce waste and you're like pooling packages and like reusing packages? I don't think Amazon could do that. So it's like, can you do it in one market and then invest in the one, do it in Europe, Latin America, Asia? It's an interesting thesis. And like, I think we've kind of seen it happen a couple times, and I just think it'll keep happening and people keep making up and innovating, making cool things. Like it'll never end. So.
Yeah, totally. I did Rappi, which is Instacart in Latin America, and the economics actually work better there.
Nice.
For that business model. Although Instacart's obviously doing great, but I don't have experiences anymore. But is there a PDD for experiences like group shared experiences on a slick mobile app that's just super easy to buy that makes it cheaper?
You're saying you don't do experiences, like you don't do anything fun?
Not anymore, basically. Or meaning, I wouldn't be surprised if this thing is this Groupon. Does this already exist?
Yeah,
In a mobile way.
Yeah, and that's the thing with Groupon. It was the retention. Like the suppliers weren't unique, and we kind of saw this in China. All these there's like hundreds, probably thousands of Groupon clones, and it was pitched to photographers, hair salons, swimming pools, like every business was just like, oh, we'll give you leads. But like, it's like literally the worst quality leads. And those people don't want to find a new place to have like brand affinity for. It's just, oh, I get this thing for 70% off. Cool. I'm going to just go get another thing for 70% off somewhere else. So yeah, the retention's terrible. So it's like, how do you figure out with experiences? It's like, well, they use it. They go through that one brand once and then they churn. And then like that brand doesn't get anything from your app or that experienced supplier, and they churn out. So, I mean, Airbnb is kind of interesting in that sense that they're trying to lock down the sort of long tail of random all over the world people hosting these things. Maybe you could do something with pooling demand, and they probably do that. I mean, I think they kind of do. So I don't know. I don't have a good thesis there, to be honest.
Going back to vertical social networks, you mentioned some places where they're interesting, like sports, perhaps. One thing you're a bit dubious on is the TikTok for X trend. We're seeing TikTok for sports, TikTok for gaming, TikTok for it's just going to be TikTok. Say a bit more about that.
Well, I think you have to have a core use case. It's just different. So how do you create the content or the supply on there? So if it's just recording a video and making a video, you kind of think of why would you use TikTok as a creator? It's because there's no social graph. And if it's good, anyone on the app can see it. And there's 1 billion users. So there's no reason to post it somewhere else if you're good. And so all the best creators will always be there. But if there's something else, like I think it might work with like HQ Trivia was really smart because nothing else did that, right? And it's a game show, verticalized social network. There wasn't really any social features. That's maybe where they kind of moved too slow on. So like sports specifically, like Around the Horn, ESPN. I don't know if you've seen that.
Of course, that's great.
Specifically, yeah, like verticalized. The whole product is custom built around that. I don't know. And part of these things is like, I don't know if I'd actually invest in them. I think there other people might, and like they're probably good businesses, but like, as VC, you don't get to invest in a lot. You have to say no a lot. So, but those are the kind of things like you could see them working just because the core DNA of the product, like it doesn't make sense to copy. It's like a unique insight. There's still a chance people copy it. There's still a chance it doesn't work, but you just, you have to have something that's just very unique and just totally different from a fundamental level.
Yeah. Going back to your point about adding, social layer on top of new data sources or things that haven't been made social yet. A few things that come to mind for me. I mean, one, you mentioned Venmo. Receipts, I've been excited about for a long time. Receipts tell us a lot about, what we care about, what we believe in, who we are as people. And if you like this artist or you support this, organization,
I mean, isn't that Venmo? Like that's Venmo, right? It's receipts. Like,
Yeah, Venmo was 1.0.
yeah.
Something that's really built for it, that really focuses on it, I think could be really interesting. Um, but yeah, Venmo got at some of the dynamics that are interesting. They just need to make the feed more interesting.
Yeah, they just like fell asleep at the wheel. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm sorry if there's people at Venmo listening to this, but
yeah,
I mean, you
yeah.
could have done a lot more cool stuff.
The other two are email and texts. Email. There's just a lot of data in email about and there you mentioned it's a game. Superhuman made it a single player game. I'm excited for it to be a multiplayer game. And you
Business,
could sort of
like with your team or friends, like
either or. I mean, at the very least, it's a better social graph of like who really knows who, how much do they communicate. Like if I'm trying to get in touch with Turner and I connect with, I could be like, okay, this person is better into them.
yeah.
I think there are a number of different game mechanics that you could build on top of it. And text as well. Michael Sipke tried a few years ago with Talk Show. I thought that was an interesting experiment. But yeah, there's a lot of rich, text conversations that I feel like, a lot of the most meaningful conversation in our lives happens over text message.
Yeah, that's true. And
Yeah.
I feel like Apple's left a ton on the table with iMessage. Like,
Yeah.
probably have the best. They probably have the best social graph of any product, right? You probably use iMessage more than you use your Facebook like social features. So it's like, man, there's a lot there.
Yeah. I want to close with a bit of a lightning round. I'm going to say a company. I want you to briefly, the TLDR, what's the bull case, the bear case, and, what you would do if you were CEO, and you could fuse them into each other.
Am I going to know about these companies, or am I like
You're going to know about them, but you can pass respectfully if you want. The first one is Snap.
Snap? Just double down, triple down on trying to increase ad prices, short term, medium term. Just keep scaling into emerging markets. They recently redesigned the Android app to make it actually work in emerging markets. And then long term, I mean, I think the long term, if you think Snap's $1 trillion business, like they need to figure out how to own that next layer of computing, AR glasses. Who knows when we get there? I'm always like, it's 10, 20 years away. So that gives you a lot of time to have crazy theses because they're so far in the future. And in terms of CEO, like, I mean, I think since I last came on, the stock was like $10 or something. I forget when I came on, but it's had a nice run since then. So, yeah. I mean, I think they've done a really good job executing and just basically they left a lot on the table that they cleaned up over the last 18 months.
So the bull case is that they figure out the next platform, and the bear case is that they don't, basically?
Yeah, I mean, I think the bear case is that people actually do stop using it, which I think has been the bear case for a while, and people thought that was the case. But I just don't think that's happening. They disclose a lot about how the NRR, whatever you want to call on the consumer side, is like kind of continuing to trickle up. If you look at total time spent, it hasn't really increased much. But I really don't think they have to increase time spent. It's just, it's a business where you monetize attention or connection or shared intimacy and just keep doing that. I mean, they've added gaming, which, the way they've done their gaming, it's monetized with ads. So in between sessions, you see a full screen video ad. It's maybe not the smoothest gaming monetization ever, but I think it works for their model. So
what do you think is so defensible about Snap? Why are people still using it? Is it just convenience, or is it brand affinity? Is it some moat, with the graph or something? Like, what do you think it is?
I think there's two actual businesses at Snapchat, and most people don't know the second one exists. So the first one's the snapping, messaging, texting. I think it's pretty core to how most kids in certain developed markets like the US and maybe like France, the UK, just and like how they communicate with their friends and their close friends. But there's also this Discover media business where it's basically Quibi. Like it's what Quibi wanted to be. And I think they disclosed they had like 80 million people that watch Discover content in Q3. It was some stat like that. Netflix has fewer US subscribers than that. So
wow.
They basically have more people in the US watching their premium mobile Quibi than Netflix does. And totally different dynamics. Netflix probably way more time spent. It's a subscription. Yeah. But you really think about it, total time spent on Netflix by someone in the US, what is it? 100 hours a month, and they pay $16 or whatever. Snap, it's like maybe they spend a total of an hour a month, and they charge ads based on, the effectiveness of converting on the ad and people making money on it down the road. And they use it for an hour a month or something, or 2 hours a month or whatever it is. So, and it's interesting because I think when they add new content, it's just like Netflix. Like, you got Will Smith did a show where he was locked down in his house. It was like Will Smith's Garage or something was the name of the show. And it was like 16 million people viewed it. It's like this silly web or Snapchat series, but it drives people to use the app and engage. People subscribe to shows, so they get pinged anytime a new one comes on. So they open up the app and they watch it, but then they might, all of a sudden just see a funny filter, send a message to a friend, engage someone else, and get that loop, kind of the acquisition and retention loop going. So I think there's just like two different parts of the business, and people don't even realize it has this massive content business that like it's essentially what Quibi wanted to be, and that's where like most of the revenue comes from. So that's kind of the way I think about it. I think a lot of people kind of don't understand that.
Totally. Long live Quibi.
Cool idea.
Dance. ByteDance, the bull bear case and what you do, what you focus on if you're a CEO.
Yeah, the bear case is probably that TikTok stays banned in India, actually gets banned in the US. I think the employees getting really distracted, which definitely has happened. People getting unfocused, losing confidence. It's the bear case for sure. Kind of played out. The bull case is that doesn't happen. I mean, I think we saw Trump like forgot about it. I don't know if you saw the headline. He like forgot he was trying to ban it or something, which is just like, I felt like the whole thing was kind of a show. I think if you look at some of the court hearings that they've put out, like a lot of the things people have said are true about how they're collecting data and like where it goes. But I think if you really have to, like the worst case scenario, it gets ripped out, you spin it out as a separate company. It's still an extremely valuable business. TikTok is basically what Instagram wants to become. And Instagram's probably a $200 billion company. Like it's probably worth north of $200 billion, maybe more. So, I think the bull case is, TikTok is essentially YouTube 2.0. If I were to remake YouTube in 2020, it would be TikTok. YouTube is landscape. It's built for desktop and your TV. The videos are 20 minutes long. You have an ad every maybe 2 ads in a 20-minute video, 3 ads in a 20-minute video. They're just really random. It's like in the middle of the conversation, it's like an ad pops up. You can't skip it. It's a terrible experience. Whereas TikTok, 20 minutes on TikTok, the maximum clip length or video length is 60 seconds, and most of them are like 10 or 20. So every 20 or 10 seconds, you have a new slot for an ad. It will never be an ad every video, but you could literally have an ad every minute, in the same sense as when you're scrolling the Facebook and the Instagram feed, when you get ads pretty consistently. So I think it's basically YouTube with a 4 to 5 times higher ad load. And just the way TikTok is, the content works, like I think every video is essentially going to be shoppable eventually. So, it's like YouTube, it's the same thing. You watch one video for 20 minutes, maybe it's a shoppable video. You can buy one thing, but like TikTok, it's like everything's shoppable. And you see 20 videos in a minute and you maybe buy 20 things. Like bad people probably do that. And that's what it is already in China. So it's like they bring that to the US. And then I think we've seen with what ByteDance does in China, they've rolled out new products. So they've got they're really big in mobile gaming over there. So instead of showing an ad for someone else, they're just like, hey, download this mobile game, and they monetize it really well and just like adds to the ecosystem. I think they've been trying to launch like education products. I don't really know how those are going. And there's just like every other category, like long form video, like a Netflix competitor, podcasting, like short form, audio clips, like short form podcasts, like premium stuff, and like ebooks and like all that kind of stuff. So I think anything you can monetize with advertising, ByteDance will just do. And they've shown that I think they paid like 10 billion in ads to grow over the last couple years. Like that's insane. So they're just like, if they think, our long form video is probably going to be better than Netflix one day, or like on the same scale, like let's pay $10 billion to get people to start using it. So I just think, anything that you can monetize with ads, any form of media, whatever, like I just think ByteDance will get into it. And they've really shown they're creator first. Like that's all they care about is making creators like the first class citizen. And I think they've started to do it with brands too. And so, you can kind of think about a lot of industries where the creators, the people driving it, are like treated like trash, like Hollywood, sort of in some cases, publishing, like book publishing, you get like 20%, 30% of the revenues from your book. Music, like a lot of artists get, very small cut. So I just think we'll see them just do different things that just give more power to creators and just like any form of media. So it's not going to be right away, but it'll be super interesting to see what they do first, how effective it is, how they cross promote. So that's the bull case.
Yeah, love it. Well, that's a perfect place to wrap, Turner. This has been a great sort of overview of where we are in consumer social late 2020, and as well as exciting opportunities to look out for. Thanks so much for coming on the podcast. This has been a really great episode.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And if you have an opportunity to get Turner on your cap table, we highly recommend it. We love co-investing with you at Gelt, and look forward to many more.
Awesome.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.